Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy that you're here for my presentation. What I'm going to do is share some slides with you, and we can have a discussion afterwards. You're also welcome to use the chat function to pose questions or topics for us to consider in a discussion afterwards. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and start. This is Lake Couchiching. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm going to acknowledge Gonini Gonijik, my ancestors, and Odanong, where I grew up, where my heart is. Bojo Mskokii Kwendishnikaz, Mong Dodem, Menjikning Donjaba, Anishinaabe Kwendiao. I said my Anishinaabe name, Red Earth Woman, and I said I'm a member of the Loon Clan at Menjikning First Nation, Ontario, Canada. With gratitude, I'd like to acknowledge my mother, Peggy Manette, from Golden Lake First Nation, my father, Ivan Douglas, and my paternal grandmother, Emma Douglas, who raised me at Menjikning First Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge Anishinaabe and Nehiyah elders and Indigenous knowledge and language keepers for their support and guidance in my life, my colleagues and mentors, my children, grandchildren, and students who have been my best teachers. I grew up in Menjikning, which is also known as Chippewas of Rama First Nation, on the shores of Lake Couchiching. My husband and I raised our children in Wikwemkong, unceded territory, on Manitoulin Island, which is located in northern Lake Huron, Ontario. I'm currently an associate professor in the Faculty of Education at Lakehead University, Aurelia, Ontario. And I want to thank the organizers of this wonderful conference, this global convention. And I want to say miigwech especially to Hanan Attila, who invited me in. So this is Odanong. It's an Anishinaabe term that talks about our heart place. I'm grounded within Indigenous epistemology and Anishinaabe philosophy, and this is reflected in the Ojibwe language, Anishinaabe, and I am an Anishinaabe learner. I've lived in many places, rural and urban, over the years and have experienced a sense of Odanong in relation to where I found myself every time. My doctoral research investigated Odanong with grade 4 and 5 urban public school children, which included some Indigenous children who'd relocated from an Indigenous First Nation community into the city. And in this research, the schoolyard became the Earth Teaching Lodge, and the children expressed a relational way of being with the land and each other. In the teacher education courses I teach today, we engage in a teaching learning process to develop a sense of Odanong, to grow our understanding and respect for Indigenous knowledge systems for application in our future classrooms. So in this workshop today, I'm going to talk about why Odanong is important and how each of us can benefit from the wisdom of Indigenous people to belong and expand our relational way of being, so that we can contribute to positive educational transformation. Today, things are shifting because of the Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission's work and the calls to action, as well as things like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights. So the federal and provincial mandates are changing, and there's impetus for Indigenous knowledge and traditions of teaching and learning in classrooms for all students. So schooling, and by schooling I mean what takes place in the box of the classroom in a school. Schooling is a Western construct. It's based on Eurocentric values of what counts as knowledge and ideals that conformity supports the state. Indigenous people have always been seen as a problem. The violent colonial legacy of schooling has resulted in intergenerational trauma and grief, almost eradicating our languages and ways of being. An emphasis in school on our children as incompetent learners takes away the responsibility for schooling to change and keeps everyone busy with closing the achievement gap. This achievement gap has not closed in spite of our efforts for over 50 years. Impacts of intergenerational trauma and grief, and the idea that the school knows best, is being countered by a movement to reclaim Indigenous traditions of teaching, learning, and raising the child in a good way. As a Western-trained speech and language pathologist and educator, I became aware of these issues for Indigenous students and families. And I wondered, why is the Indigenous child silent in class? And it seemed to me that they were having issues with the space of the classroom. They didn't feel they belonged or had power. There was a lack of agency. And I noticed that the way they used language and engaged wasn't acceptable. So I needed to help create space for them to talk about experiences, share and listen to others, and think about things and reflect and making meaningful connections. And I had to look at myself. I had to do some self-facing and own up to the fact that I had been part of the problem. I had to reevaluate what I was doing, unlearning what I thought I knew from Western education and training, and to move into observing, inquiring, and relearning about Indigenous children and our ways of being. Our traditions of teaching and learning are really still alive today in spite of everything that's happened to us. And also, I'm a parent, and as I raised two boys, I was able to embark on a wonderful learning journey and started to be able to see the world through the Indigenous eyes of my children. And it really helped me to awaken and to appreciate Indigenous relational ways of being and our traditions of teaching and learning. So whose knowledge counts? So Indigenous people have an orality tradition And we know that schools privilege written language. So there's a very big disconnect there. These systems are at odds. And, I think we can appreciate that a lot of Indigenous learners struggle to find a suitable bridge between orality and literacy because of the huge emphasis on written language as knowledge in our schools. So traditional Indigenous ways of coming to know are based on experience and storytelling. And these have been largely untapped and unacknowledged in the classroom. So together we engage in a critical process of learning and unlearning. So as I mentioned, I've been able to see from within an Indigenous paradigm, drawing on my own lived experiences as an Anishinaabe or Ojibwe woman, and I can appreciate the socio-cultural, linguistic, historical, political, philosophical perspectives. So in the next few slides, I'll share to bring awareness to address these questions that I pose here on this slide. What do we value? What are the hallmarks of Indigenous knowledge and passing on the knowledge? Where does knowledge come from? So this is a very old teaching that has to do with an Indigenous relational way of being. So we center the child. The child is the center of our universe. And you can see at the center of this wheel that, a person, you and me, the child, we are complex human beings, and there's 4 aspects to our being. So in the north, in the white section, we think about our intellect and our ability to think and reason. In the east, in the yellow quadrant, we think about our spiritual aspect, our intuition, our visioning. In the south, in the red quadrant, we can consider that we're also physical beings. We can do things, we can make things, we can move about, we can demonstrate our skills and make things and show things. And in the west, in the black colored quadrant of this wheel, we can acknowledge that we're also emotional, feeling beings, and we relate to each other, especially when we hear a story from another person. We can relate, we can make meaningful connections to each other. And so in our teachings as Anishinaabe people, we are brought up to understand that our life course journey is things go very smoothly, and we can contribute to our family, community, and nation in good ways if we can always maintain balance within ourselves, so that our 4 aspects are in harmony, so that we know that if we ignore some aspect of ourself, it affects all the other aspects of our being, and we become unwell or out of balance. And so we shift things around and we rebalance so that all aspects of ourself are nurtured. Because, if we think of this, this central figure as a wheel, if one aspect of ourself is ignored and not nurtured or acknowledged, it's flat, it's low. And if we consider this to be a wheel, it's not going to roll smoothly, right? And the other layers of this wheel are meant to show how, as an individual, my actions, my thoughts, my beliefs and values, and the way I demonstrate these has influence within my family, the community, the nation, the universe, and beyond. So we can consider standing by a very calm pond, and then we throw a pebble up into the air and it plops into the lake, right in the middle of the lake. And what happens? We hear that sound, we hear that energy coming in contact with that water. And what happens is there are ripples created when those energies interact. And those ripples move out in all directions. And so it demonstrates for us the idea of interconnectivity and interrelationships. And so, for example, when I do something, it impacts everything. And we are all interconnected. And so this wheel demonstrates what I'll say is an Indigenous philosophy in our way of being, and we are relational beings. This slide shows some beautiful stones, some rocks. And I picked this slide because it helps explain an Indigenous and an Anishinaabe perspective on relationality with the natural world. So for myself, I consider grandfather rocks to be alive. I call them grandfather or Mishomis because they're the oldest part of the earth. The rocks have been here for a long, long time. And the rocks know everything that ever happened here, everything that was ever said or done. And the rocks that I have in my bundle, they help me remember things. And the rocks that I have are very much a part of my family and home life. So the rocks are, in the living room, in the kitchen, and they're part of all the visiting and the storytelling that happens. And they're very much a part of my family. I call them grandfathers. So, this is to kind of illustrate for you how, if we think about teaching environmental studies, for example, or science, the idea that the natural parts of our world are alive to Indigenous people. And we refer to all of nature as our relations. These rocks are our relatives. So let's say they're mineral rich. Maybe they have some gold flecks in them. Maybe they have diamonds in them. We don't see these as resources. We see them as relatives. And so it's a very different philosophy and way that we interact and relate with the natural world compared to Western conceptions. And so when we're learning science, let's say we're in a grade 2 classroom in a science curriculum, and we're learning about the different layers of the soil, and we're identifying the different types of rocks. Well, we can also connect with a local Indigenous person, and they can take us out on the land or share with us their bundle that likely has some rocks in it and help us understand a relational way of being alongside these beautiful grandfathers. And so that's a way to bring in the Indigenous perspectives of a relational way of being. So this shows the framework that I used as an Indigenous pedagogy in my doctoral research. And I do continue to use this in all the courses that I teach in the university today. So the colors represent the aspects of the learner and ways of learning. So remember, we looked at the 4 aspects of a person earlier in that other wheel. And you can see here, we have these 4 aspects of ourselves. We are thinking, we are intuitive, and we are reflecting. We are experiencing and doing, and we are relating and feeling. And how do we connect ourselves in a holistic way to a schooling learning environment? We can write, we can draw, we can listen, and we can share stories. And so this is what I refer to as like a holistic classroom pedagogy. And it's based on our traditions of teaching and learning involving us holistically. And the green background, the green represents the earth as our teacher, and the blue represents the sky world. And that relates to the vastness of the creation. And it reminds us that from within an Indigenous perspective, it's not necessary and it's not possible to know everything. We're surrounded by mystery and amazement. And you might have heard it referred to as the great mystery. So here's a picture of my current classroom at the university. And I want to talk now about how I bring the story circle into a learning process, a formal academic learning process. And I'm also going to talk about how this can also work with children in public school, elementary school, or high schools even. So from within an Indigenous knowledge paradigm, inward ways of knowing are part of knowledge creation. Knowledge is experience, and knowledge transfer occurs through story. Indigenous knowledge is characterized as personal, oral, experiential, holistic, and it's conveyed in narrative. Circle pedagogy is one of the Indigenous pedagogical approaches that I'm comfortable with teaching children and teachers in higher education, with pre-service student teachers and graduate students too. And I find that this circle brings belonging, a sense of safety, and a respectful community. And we do have a circle protocol that we utilize here in the territory where I live. We gather in a circle so that we can see each other. At the beginning of each circle, I explain that there is a protocol, and this protocol ensures a safe place of belonging. At the center of the circle is a candle. The fire is central to our community, and we're invited to take away what we can use for our personal learning journey and aspirations for wellness. And we can leave behind any difficult feelings or words that are shared, ideas that are shared that don't resonate positively with us. And we give these to the fire. Fire has the power to transform negativity into positive energy for the universe. So students come into the circle with their natural artifact, sometimes creative work or reflective reading thoughts. And I always start by first explaining the purpose of the circle. And I do this by presenting an invitation to participants. It's a provocation. So I might say, okay, today, let's share our story about what happened when we went out into the green space beside the school. What did we notice? What really resonated with us? And how did that make us feel? What did we notice? Any details? And it'll explain why we brought that natural artifact back into the classroom. So something like, share a story about how you came to bring this natural artifact into our class today. So Mishomis, or grandfather rock, is passed around clockwise from person to person as they share. And sometimes Mishomis goes around the circle more than once to give ample opportunity for storying. So this visual illustrates a circle process of knowledge creation. So in the left-hand figure, we consider that a person sharing a story brings with them all of their life experiences, all of their knowledge and their ancestral relations that come with the person. Grandfather rock Mishomis is passed when the person completes their turn and the process moves in a clockwise direction. The next person in the circle shares in the process by listening, and they may or may not choose to speak. Each person in the circle connects to the story shared by meaning making that's relevant to their own life and their own sensibilities. The circle continues until everyone has had a turn. And as I mentioned, sometimes the process is repeated for another round if we have time. The illustration on the right shows how the speaker's story is listened to, and it influences the story that the next person tells or thinks about. They make this story their own by meaningful associations, thinking and expressing their story. This process continues, and the shared experience by everyone in the circle generates new knowledge. That's what that spiral is meant to represent. And after the circle closes, the process continues for each person, because they will continue to reflect and they're going to make some new meaningful connections in the future. So I had the wonderful opportunity to learn from Elder Peter O'Chase. He was Anishinaabe and lived in the Rocky Mountains in the early 80s and in Alberta. And he used to talk about to twice understand. Sometimes he'd say to me, Sharla, I want you to twice understand this. And at the time, I just thought it meant, okay, listen up, this is important. But now, as I've worked in story circles a lot as an educator, I can understand what he meant and how he wanted me to be able to re-story what he was sharing with me, and that it would bring deeper understanding for me. It would bring clarity years from now to me. and also to the other people that I shared it with. So the story circle process reflects a communal knowledge creation process, and it's continually in motion. So in my doctoral research with children in grade 4 and 5, these elementary school children and I left the classroom. We went out into the schoolyard, and everybody was able to find a place in the schoolyard just to be. And sometimes today, when I go into work with classes, we'll go to a nearby green space. And I also use a similar technique in the university courses that I teach with adult learners. So we sit quietly for 15 or 20 minutes with the instruction to observe, listen, feel, and reflect. And so we're drawing on a pedagogy of land in an urban or rural schooling context here. So this slide shows the knowledge created in the student responses when I did this in my doctoral research. And so these are when the children storied about their experience out in the schoolyard, these words and concepts were expressed. And so they're represented by different colors of puzzle pieces. And the colors represent embodied Indigenous knowledge reflected in holistic Indigenous learning and interconnectivity with all things. So the white pieces represent understanding with language and thought. The yellow relate to intuition and reflective knowing. The red puzzle pieces represent things that we can do, experiential knowing. And the black refer to understanding and relationship. So at the core is the concept of self-relation and balance, extending from the inside and outward to an individual's relations, their family, clan, community, in all directions and levels of the earth world, ancestral connections, the sky world and the universe, the seen and the unseen, the human and the more than human realms. So the Anishinaabe ecological relational paradigm is represented in medicine circles where we visualize the colors and different concepts. So let's just think about the background for a moment. I wanted to illustrate the Indigenous way of two-eyed seeing. So appreciating the seen and the unseen, and to acknowledge that all elements, water, earth, air, and fire, and life are in flux with Minado, or the implicate order, the great mystery. Connection and relationship to Ake, or the land, and the sensibility of relationship with Mskokii, Mother Earth, is honored in any context, including an urban environment, and even in our setting right here and right now. So with Faculty of Education students, I sometimes engage them in 3 independent land experiences. We focus on finding, deepening, and respecting tasks. And it brings depth of relationships and stories of place. And then in story circles, we share so that our stories are layered, just as the footprints of our ancestors are layered within the earth under our feet. So this is something that was shared by a 10-year-old girl when I did my doctoral research. And this was in 2016. And she's really grateful for her relationship with land that she came to understand. And this one is from a University of Alberta teacher education student. And it illustrates biophilia, the love of nature. And she came to know this from experiences just being on the land by herself in the course that I taught. So a lot of connections there and a strong sense of biophilia. This is a creative work by another Faculty of Education student. And this is Mishomis, her grandfather rock. And she made this into a beautiful sculpture. And the eye there is meant to represent two-eyed seeing. So being able to appreciate an Indigenous relational way of being and worldview philosophy, as well as the Western academic schooling perspective. So I thought it was really beautiful. So we're going to talk about a post-workshop land acknowledgement bundle activity. And so I thought this might, I thought it was really fitting. And we'll talk about the learning activity now, okay? How am I doing for time here? Okay, good. Okay, so how do we take all of this and apply it? You're probably wondering. So I developed an idea for an activity, and I'm hoping this is something you can do no matter where your classroom is, whatever part of the world you find yourself in. There is a way to connect with Odanong. So what you could do is take your students outside of the box of the classroom and send them out with instructions to settle themselves, to do this individually, to listen, observe, feel, smell for about 15 minutes or so, and then to move around the area and select something that resonates with them. Is there something natural that's speaking to them, that's calling their attention? And then they can bring that back into the classroom. And so I'm going to talk about a bundle. You're going to make a bundle. So a bundle is a tangible representation of gratitude and respect for where we live in a good relational way with each other, the lands and waters. And each child or each student's story and voice are honored, creating community and reciprocity in relationship. So your land acknowledgement bundle is going to signify continued commitment to respectful space in the classroom for stories. And this pedagogy elevates the knowledge and the life experience of the child or student by honoring their right to their story, and it creates space in school for them to tell it. So what you could do is have a circle and go around the circle and give each person a chance to show what it is that they brought from nature into this space. and to talk about how they connected to that, to describe if it was something that caught their eye, if it was something that they're feeling. Maybe they feel some type of connection to this. Maybe it reminds them of their Odenong, their heart place in some way. And let them story in a story circle about it. And then when everybody's finished talking, sometimes what I do is I'll put a piece of cloth down in the center of the circle beside the candle. And as each person shares and shows what they brought from nature, their natural artifact, they come and place it on that cloth. And then after the story circle is complete, we all together tie everything into that cloth, tie a knot on the top of the cloth to form an actual bundle. And then we keep that bundle in a significant place inside our classroom. And it'll help us continue to dedicate time for storytelling, honoring the voices of the child or the student, and to have an opportunity to feel that very beautiful sense of belonging and that sense of being respected, so that we feel safe in sharing. We feel safe in our vulnerability and the questions that we pose, because we don't know everything. So I think this might be something that that everyone could do if you want to. I was trying to think of something that would be powerful for all, and so that's what I came up with. And I just want to say, miigwech, thank you. I took this photo when I was in my boat. I was bombing across the little lake where I have my cabin. And as I was going forward, I noticed that this goose took off, and it looked like it was going backwards. It was going back from where I had come. And it brought to mind my colleague, Angela Wolf, who I taught with at University of Alberta in the Aboriginal Teacher Education Program. And she said, we have to go all the way back in order to go forward. And so that's what this photo represents for me. So I hope you're inspired by what I've shared in my journey, so that you can share in this challenge. I had to unlearn so much and to return to Indigenous values and perspectives so that I can be an agent of positive change in our society through the privilege of being a teacher. So I hope you'll do more work in that area. I know you're already doing it, but keep going. And there's my email. If you'd like to contact me, that would be wonderful.